There are stories told only in hushed tones on the decks of ships, in the dim light of harbor bars, set to the soundtrack of creaking tackle and the distant cry of gulls. These aren't the stories you read in the papers. They live in the collective memory of the sea, passed down from father to son, from captain to cabin boy. Legends of ghost ships, of colossal sea monsters. And one of the strangest, most mesmerizing legends of all is the story of the Milky Seas. Imagine a night in the open ocean, an absolute impenetrable darkness where the only sources of light are the distant cold stars and the navigation lights of your vessel. And then, suddenly, you notice the horizon beginning to glow. The sky remains black, but the sea beneath you transforms. It becomes white, like a boundless field of freshly fallen snow, emitting its own unearthly, milky luminescence. The water loses its transparency, turning into light. They say that in these moments, the line between sea and sky vanishes, and the ship sails on light, lost in infinity. For centuries, these accounts were dismissed as sailors' yarns, the product of tired imaginations, or an optical illusion. But on October 27, 2025, the legend became reality. At 3:11 a.m. Greenwich Mean Time, a geostationary satellite from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, known as NOAA-20, while passing over the northwestern Indian Ocean, recorded something anomalous. In the silence of the Mission Control Center in Maryland, where dozens of screens scrolled with endless lines of telemetry and updated weather maps, one of the operators noticed a strange patch on an image from the high-sensitivity CIRS radiometer. This instrument is capable of detecting incredibly faint light visible at night, the lights of cities, auroras, forest fires. But what it saw that day didn't fit into any known category. South of the coast of Somalia, an area of the ocean stretching for hundreds of kilometers, hundreds of miles, was glowing. It glowed with a uniform, dim, but distinct light. This was not a reflection of the moon. Its light would have been different, sharper, and dependent on cloud cover. This was not a cluster of fishing boats. Their lights would have appeared as individual points. This was a solid, gigantic, living patch of light. Its area, by initial, rough estimates, was over 100,000 square kilometers, nearly 40,000 square miles. That's comparable to the area of Iceland or the state of Kentucky. An entire country of light, which had suddenly appeared in the middle of the ocean. The scientific community was electrified. For the first time in human history, a Milky Sea had not just been witnessed, but documented with all the rigor of modern technology. Press releases flew around the world. Leading oceanographic institutions published statements. The official version, proposed almost immediately, was elegant, logical, and based on decades of research. The phenomenon was explained as a rare but natural event, a massive bloom of bioluminescent bacteria, specifically the species Vibrio harvae. The official view, the system, told us this. These microscopic organisms can emit light as a result of a chemical reaction. Normally, their concentration in the water is too low for this glow to be noticeable, but under certain, exceptionally rare conditions, a specific water temperature, an abundance of nutrients brought up by deep-sea currents, and the presence of a phytoplankton bloom on which they feed, their population can explode exponentially. Billions of bacteria for every cubic centimeter of water. They use a mechanism known as quorum sensing. When their density reaches a critical threshold, they begin to emit light in sync, all together. This isn't a chaotic flicker, but a coordinated action of an entire colony. And when this colony grows to the size of a small country, we observe a Milky Sea. The explanation seemed exhaustive. It was published in the journal Nature Geoscience. Leading scientists gave interviews in which they called the satellite image, dubbed Event Trickster, a breakthrough in the study of marine ecosystems. The mystery that had plagued sailors since the time of Jules Verne seemed to have been definitively solved. The world breathed a sigh of relief, marveling at yet another wonderful, but entirely explainable, natural phenomenon. But while oceanographers celebrated their victory in a completely different field of science, among the community of astronomers studying small bodies of the solar system, a very different atmosphere prevailed. An atmosphere of quiet, unsettling bewilderment. Because several weeks before the NOAA-20 satellite captured the anomalous glow in the Indian Ocean, another event occurred. A quiet event, unnoticed by the general public, but extremely important to specialists. It was connected to one of the strangest objects ever to enter our solar system. Its official name is 3I Atlas. The I in its name stands for interstellar. It was only the third confirmed interstellar visitor to our system after the mysterious Oumuamua and comet Borisov. But 3I Atlas was unlike either of them. It wasn't a cigar-shaped asteroid like Oumuamua, and it wasn't a typical comet like Borisov. Its behavior was anomalous from the very beginning. Discovered by the Atlas telescope system in Hawaii, it first appeared as a faint point, but as it approached the sun, it didn't just get brighter. Its coma, the cloud of gas and dust around its nucleus, pulsated. Its spectral analysis showed a strange, uncharacteristic prevalence of certain nitrogen isotopes and the presence of complex organic compounds that had never before been seen in such quantities. But most importantly, its trajectory. It had a slight but constant non-gravitational acceleration that could not be fully explained by the reactive force of evaporating gases. It was as if it was adjusting its course. And then, on October 8th, 2025, just 19 days before the Milky Sea was recorded, several observatories, including the Subaru telescope and the Pan-STARRS system, detected a sudden flare on object 3I Atlas. For a few hours, its brightness increased sharply, and then just as sharply fell. Subsequent observations showed that a small fragment had broken off from the main body. The Minor Planet Center assigned it the preliminary designation 3I Atlas b. This wasn't something out of the ordinary. Comets often break apart as they approach the sun. But then the strangeness began. Trajectory calculations for this fragment, conducted by NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, showed that its orbit intersected with Earth's. The fragment was tiny, estimated at no more than 2 to 3 meters, about 6 to 10 feet, in diameter. It posed no threat. An official press release, issued a few days later, stated that a minor fragment of interstellar object 3I Atlas will enter Earth's atmosphere and completely burn up at an altitude of over 80 kilometers, about 50 miles. The forecast was accurate. On October 10th, during the night, tracking satellites recorded a bright fireball over the Indian Ocean. It flashed and went out. A space pebble, having traveled billions of kilometers through the interstellar void, ended its journey in Earth's atmosphere. The story was over. No one paid it any mind. It was just a footnote in astronomical reports, an event of interest only to a narrow circle of specialists. 2 events, separated by 17 days. 1, a silent, almost invisible streak of fire high in the atmosphere. The other, a gigantic glowing patch in the depths of the ocean. One in the world of astronomy, the other in the world of oceanography. They existed in different dimensions of scientific knowledge, separated by an insurmountable wall of disciplinary boundaries. But if you superimpose the maps of these 2 events, a disturbing picture emerges. The entry point of fragment 3I Atlas b into the atmosphere was located almost exactly over the same region of the Indian Ocean where, 2.5 weeks later, the largest Milky Sea in recorded history appeared. A coincidence? Correlation does not imply causation. That's the first rule of any scientific analysis. But the scale of this coincidence was too great to be simply ignored. This was choreography performed with cosmic precision. Or an absurd, unbelievable accident. Which will your brain choose? Which will the system choose? Of course, official science chose coincidence. A few independent bloggers and amateur astronomers on forums pointed out this strange connection, but their voices were drowned out by a chorus of authoritative opinions. Oceanographers stated that the ocean's ecosystem is inert, and no meteor could cause such a rapid and large-scale biological reaction. Astronomers, in turn, asserted that the fragment had completely burned up in the atmosphere, leaving no trace, and even if some microscopic particles had reached the water, they would have dissolved without any consequences. Any attempt to link these two events was declared pseudoscience and a chase for cheap sensations. But there was another fact that didn't fit into this neat picture. When Event Trickster was recorded, several scientific organizations, including the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, announced their intention to send a research vessel to the area to take water samples. It was a unique chance to directly confirm or refute the bacterial hypothesis, to take a sample of the Milky Sea and study it under a microscope. But the expedition never happened. The official explanation was that a powerful and unexpectedly persistent storm front had formed in the region, making it impossible for any vessel to be in the anomaly zone. For weeks, the area was closed to shipping, and when the storm finally subsided, the glow had already disappeared. The chance was lost. Another coincidence? Or the perfect pretext? The official version was flawless, logical, and reassuring. A space pebble burned up. Bacteria bloomed. A storm prevented samples from being taken. 3 unrelated events. 3 simple explanations. But if you've ever tried to solve a complex puzzle, you know that the biggest mistakes are hidden, not in the complex details, but in the overly simple answers and the all-too-convenient coincidences. The question wasn't whether the official version was plausible. It was. The question was different. Was it the whole truth, or only the part they allowed us to see? When the system speaks, it speaks with a voice of confidence and authority. Its statements, polished by press offices and vetted by boards of directors, land on the information landscape like a heavy granite foundation. They create reality. And in the first days after the discovery of the Milky Sea, that reality was simple and understandable. Vibrio Harvii. 2 words that explained everything. For a moment, let's accept the official version at face value. Let's immerse ourselves in its logic, appreciate its elegance. Imagine this microscopic ballet, performed in the water column. In one perfect moment, all the conditions align. A powerful deep water current, the Somali current, brings up waters rich in nitrates and phosphates from the depths. A feast for phytoplankton. Millions of metric tons of nutrients rise into the sunlit zone. An explosive growth of planktonic algae begins, staining the water green. And following them, they come, the Vibrio Harvii bacteria. They feast on the plankton remains, multiplying at an incredible rate. Their population doubles every 20 minutes. When their concentration reaches a critical mass, several 100 million cells per milliliter, the quorum sensing mechanism is triggered. Each bacterium releases signaling molecules. When there are enough of these molecules, they initiate a cascade reaction inside the cells, activating the gene responsible for luminescence. And then the entire colony, trillions upon trillions of individual organisms, flashes on simultaneously, like one giant, living organism. They convert chemical energy into light. It's a beautiful, complex, and completely natural picture. It explains both the scale and the glow. It fits within the framework of everything we know about the ocean. And that is precisely why it is so dangerous. Because when an explanation is too good, We stop asking questions. We stop looking for the cracks in that monolithic facade. But there are always cracks. You just have to know where to look. The first crack, the first chip on this perfect granite slab of the official version, was the question of fuel. A question of logistics. To feed a bacterial colony covering 100,000 square kilometers and make it glow requires a truly astronomical amount of nutrients. We're not talking about tons, but megatons of biomass. The official version casually referred to upwelling, the rise of deep waters, linked to the Somali current. That sounds scientific, but if you look into the archives of oceanographic data, the picture becomes very different. The Somali current is a seasonal phenomenon. It reaches its peak in the summer during the southwest monsoon, creating one of the most powerful upwellings on the planet. But Event Trickster occurred in late October. This is the intermonsoon period, when the Somali current weakens and changes direction. At this time of year, there is simply no powerful, sustained upwelling of deep water in this region. This is confirmed by satellite data measuring the ocean surface temperature. Upwelling always leaves a cold signature, a patch of colder water that has risen from the depths. But on the satellite temperature maps for the weeks preceding the event, no significant cold anomalies were recorded in this area. The water was uniformly warm. That is, the primary mechanism that was supposed to deliver the fuel for this gigantic fire of life simply wasn't working at the time. This discovery was not made within the walls of a prestigious institution. It was born on a little-known online forum dedicated to the analysis of open-access oceanographic data. A user with the nickname Salinity Seeker, who turned out to be a graduate oceanography student from the University of Bremen, published a detailed analysis with temperature graphs and current models for the last 5 years. His conclusion was categorical. A large-scale upwelling capable of supporting such a bloom at this time of year in this location contradicts all known circulation models of the Indian Ocean. Either our models are wrong, or the energy source for this glow was non-biological. This post started an entire discussion thread. Dozens of other enthusiasts and independent researchers began to dig deeper. They checked chlorophyll concentration data from the Aqua and Terra satellites. Any large-scale phytoplankton growth would have left a clear green trail that would have appeared several days before the bacterial bloom. But the data showed only background, normal values. There was no preceding algal bloom. It turned out that the bacteria didn't just multiply at the wrong time. They multiplied without having enough food. It's as if a city of 1 million people suddenly grew in the middle of a desert for no apparent reason. It violated the fundamental laws of biological economics. A feast was thrown, but no food was delivered. The second crack turned out to be even deeper. It concerned the speed and synchronicity of the event. Biological processes, even the fastest ones, have inertia. A population cannot appear out of nowhere overnight. It has to grow. Even under ideal conditions, with the population doubling every 20 minutes, it would take days, if not longer, to cover an area of 100,000 square kilometers with a layer of water glowing with bacteria. And this growth would be uneven. It would start in a few centers where conditions are most favorable and gradually spread outward, like a forest fire caught by the wind of the currents. We would have seen on satellite images how the patch originates, grows, changes shape. But what the NOAA-20 satellite recorded was completely different. In the image taken 6 hours before Event Trickster, there was nothing in this area. Absolutely dark water. And in the next image, an already complete, fully formed, gigantic glowing field. It didn't grow. It switched on. Moreover, its shape was suspiciously uniform. The brightness of the glow across its entire vast area was practically identical. In living, chaotic systems, that doesn't happen. Any real bacterial bloom has a complex structure. Brighter and denser zones in the centers of reproduction, dimmer ones on the periphery, bizarre patterns created by currents and eddies. It's a living, breathing, heterogeneous structure. But the Milky Sea in the image looked like artificial lighting, like a giant LED panel lying underwater, where all the pixels are lit with the same intensity. This was not a picture painted by nature. It was a color fill in a graphics editor. This observation led independent analysts to an even more disturbing conclusion. What if this wasn't reproduction, but activation? What if something was already present in the water in a dormant state, distributed over a huge territory, and received a simultaneous signal to act? A signal that caused it to switch on across the entire area at once. This hypothesis explained both the speed and the uniformity, but it gave rise to a new, far more frightening question. What was this something? And where did the signal come from? The third crack was the faintest, almost invisible, but it was the one that ultimately shattered the entire structure of the official version. It was hidden in the satellite data itself, or more precisely, in what was missing from it. The VIRS instrument aboard NOAA 20 is not just a camera. It's a highly complex radiometer that records radiation in 22 different spectral bands, from visible light to the far infrared range. The public was shown a beautiful black and white image obtained in the so-called day-night band, which is most sensitive to faint light. But what did the other bands show? In particular, the infrared ones, which measure temperature. Any biological process, especially of such a colossal scale, releases heat. The metabolism of trillions of bacteria converting chemical energy into light should have inevitably raised the temperature of the surrounding water, even if only by tenths of a degree. It's a law of thermodynamics. We should have seen a warm spot on the thermograms, perfectly matching the contours of the glowing one. But in the publicly available data from the infrared channels, there was nothing. The water temperature inside the Milky Sea was exactly the same as outside. No thermal signature. The glow was absolutely cold. This meant one of two things. Either the laws of thermodynamics temporarily ceased to function at this point in the Indian Ocean, or the source of the light had nothing to do with biological metabolism as we know it. The energy conversion process was so efficient that it had virtually no thermal losses. In terrestrial biology, such a thing does not exist. But that's not the strangest part. The strangest part was that the official institutions, which had published dozens of articles and press releases about the Milky Sea, never mentioned this thermal anomaly, this paradox. They simply ignored the data from their own instruments, which directly contradicted their own theory. They took only the part of the data that suited them, the pretty picture of the glow, and swept everything else under the rug. And this is no longer a mistake. It's not an oversight. It's a conscious choice. It's an act of concealment. The issue wasn't that their model was wrong. The issue was that they knew it was wrong, but still presented it to the world as the only possible truth. Why? Why create this complex, pseudo-scientific smokescreen? Perhaps because the real cause of the glow was so strange, so far beyond the bounds of conventional science, that admitting it would have meant causing a panic, or worse, drawing unwanted attention to what actually happened in the depths of the ocean after the fall of the 3I Atlas fragment. The official version was not an explanation. It was a wall, hastily erected so that we wouldn't see what was happening behind it. But now, there were 3 huge breaches in that wall, and through them, the light of a very different, far more disturbing truth was beginning to shine. When one pillar of an official theory collapses, the entire structure begins to tremble. But when 3 supports fall at once, the lack of fuel, the impossible speed, and the cold glow, the building can no longer be saved. It is doomed. The hypothesis of the Milky Sea's bacterial origin lay in ruins, blown to dust by cold, inexorable facts. But in the ruins of an old truth, a gaping void always remains. A question. If it wasn't bacteria, then what was it? And this question led us straight back, up, beyond the atmosphere, to that very first event that the system had tried so hard to separate from everything else, to the fiery streak left by the fragment 3I Atlas B. Officially, it burned up without a trace. But what if that was a lie? What if it wasn't just a rock, but rather a capsule, a container? What if its purpose was not to crash into the Earth, but to deliver something into its upper atmosphere, from where this something could slowly settle into the ocean? This hypothesis was wild, almost fantastical, but it explained everything. The sudden appearance of the anomaly, its scale, and its strange physical properties. But to turn it from a guess into a theory, evidence was needed. It was necessary to find out what this fragment really was. What was it made of? And the answer to that question had to exist. In the modern world, nothing disappears without a trace, especially not something that arrives from space. Our planet is shrouded in an invisible web of sensors, radars, and telescopes. There is an entire industry, an entire science, dedicated to tracking everything that enters our atmosphere. And the crown jewel of this system is a network of specialized satellites, unofficially known as the Global Fireball Observatory. It's a joint project of NASA, the U.S. Air Force, and several European space agencies. Dozens of spacecraft in various orbits continuously scan the Earth. Their task is to record flashes in the atmosphere. Any of them. From the entry of spent rocket stages to the fall of meteoroids. They determine the trajectory, speed, altitude, and most importantly, they perform an instantaneous spectroscopy of the fireball. As the object burns, refracting light through special prisms, instruments on board the satellite break its glow down into a spectrum. Each line in this spectrum is a chemical fingerprint. Here's the line for iron. Here's sodium. Here's magnesium. This allows scientists to determine the composition of celestial bodies without having physical samples. This system is one of the greatest achievements of modern science, and it works flawlessly. All the information collected by this network, after automatic processing, goes into a public archive maintained by the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. Anyone, from a schoolchild to a professor, can go to this website, enter a date, and see all the fireball events recorded on that day. This archive is the embodiment of the ideal of open science, a bastion of transparency. And it was in this very bastion that we discovered a ghost. A search of the event archive for October 10th, 2025, immediately yielded the correct entry. Event GB 2025-10-0417. Time, 04.17 GMT. Location, Indian Ocean. Presumed source, fragment 3I, Atlas B. Everything matched. On the event page, there was a neat infographic. A map with the trajectory plotted. A graph of altitude and speed. The data was extremely precise. Entry into the atmosphere at an altitude of 120 kilometers, about 75 miles. Maximum brightness at 85. Complete disintegration at 78. Everything went according to plan. Everything, except for one thing. At the very bottom of the page, where the most important file should have been, the results of the spectral analysis, there was a blank line. Instead of a link to the data file, there was a laconic, cold message written in system font. File, spectral, analysis, date, not found. Error code 404. This was strange. Errors happen. But next to the trajectory, next to the brightness graph, all the files were in place. The error had affected only one, but the most crucial, element. We started browsing the archive further. Events from an hour before. Dozens of small meteors around the world, all with their spectral files. Events an hour after. The same. The system was working perfectly. The spectrographs on the satellites were diligently collecting data, and the automated system was diligently posting them to the archive. The failure occurred selectively, exclusively for one single event, the most important, most interesting event in recent years. This no longer looked like a random error. It looked like a surgically precise intervention. Someone had entered the system and deleted one specific file. On the forums where we discussed this, an official position immediately appeared, voiced by the archive administrator, a NASA employee. His message was a model of corporate calm. He wrote, "Thank you for your attention to detail. During the passage of Fireball GB 100417, there was a brief malfunction in the primary spectrographic sensor on the observing satellite. The data obtained at that moment were corrupted and did not pass automatic verification and were therefore not published to avoid misinterpretation. Our engineers are working to analyze the cause of the failure. We apologize for the inconvenience." An elegant, technically sound explanation. It sounded convincing, but it fell apart at the first attempt to verify it. The Global Fireball Observatory is not one satellite. It's a network. Any point on Earth at any given moment is visible to at least 2, and often 3 or 4 spacecraft. This is done specifically for redundancy and for triangulation, to accurately determine the trajectory. If the sensor on one satellite had failed, the data should have come from the others. For the spectral analysis to disappear completely, the sensors on 3 or 4 satellites, located thousands of kilometers apart, would have had to fail simultaneously. The probability of such an event is comparable to the probability of being struck by lightning 3 times in a row while winning the lottery. This was not a failure. This was a cover-up disguised as a failure. The silence we encountered in the archive was not accidental. It was engineered. It was an architecture of silence. Someone had built a wall around this data, and that meant that behind this wall lay something extremely important. What if they had found something? What if the sensors hadn't failed, but, on the contrary, had performed perfectly? What if the spectrum they obtained was so anomalous, so impossible from the perspective of known chemistry and physics, that it raised an alarm at the highest level? What if the protocol for such a situation is not publication, but immediate classification? We can only speculate about what was in that deleted file. Perhaps it was the spectral lines of elements not on the periodic table, or isotopic ratios that violate all the laws of planetary system formation. Or maybe something even stranger. Not just elements, but complex organic signatures, traces of complex polymers that had somehow, miraculously, survived the fiery entry into the atmosphere, protected by some unknown mechanism. If such a spectrum had been published, it would have revolutionized science. It would have become direct proof not just of extraterrestrial life, but of extraterrestrial technology. A technology capable of delivering biological or quasi-biological material across interstellar space and through a planet's atmosphere. The absence of data became the loudest piece of evidence. This digital ghost, this hole in the world's most reliable information system, screamed louder than any direct proof. It said, "You're looking in the wrong place. The mystery isn't in the ocean. The mystery is what fell into the ocean." The system wasn't just hiding information. It was protecting us from it. Or more likely, protecting itself. The publication of such data would have triggered a chain reaction that could no longer be controlled. Panic? Yes. But not only that. It would have triggered a barrage of questions to which the authorities have no answers. What is this object? What is its purpose? Is it a threat? Who sent it? Silence is always a tool of control. By creating an information vacuum, the system buys time. Time for analysis. Time to formulate a response. Time to prepare for what comes next, without the knowledge or participation of the rest of humanity. The silence was not accidental. It was the answer. The answer to what the satellite saw in those few seconds as the fragment of 3I Atlas b disintegrated in the mesosphere. And that answer was so frightening that they chose to bury it in a digital sarcophagus under a nameless error code. They thought that would be enough. But they underestimated the power of curiosity. And they didn't know that while they were erasing data from servers, someone else, far from government programs, had pointed his own instrument at that same patch of sky. And he saw something. In the architecture of concealment created by the system, every element serves a single purpose: to build an impenetrable wall. Official explanations are the smooth, polished blocks. Technical failures are the mortar that binds them together. And the silence of respected scientists is the heavy, oppressive foundation. It seemed impossible to break through such a defense. When centralized sources of information fall silent or lie, where do you turn for the truth? The answer is always the same: to the periphery. To those who observe not because it is their job, but because it is their calling. To those who build their own instruments, trusting only their own eyes and their own calculations. In a world where information becomes a weapon, the most dangerous people for the system are the independent witnesses. And on the night of October 10th, 2025, there was one such witness. His name is Stephen Burns, and he became what the ancient myths called an oracle, the one who speaks a truth that no one is ready to hear. Stephen Burns was not an employee of NASA or the European Space Agency. He didn't receive government grants or publish in prestigious journals. His name was not known to the general public. He was a man of silence, a former optical engineer who had worked for over 30 years at the German company Carl Zeiss. He had retired and settled in a remote corner of the Scottish Highlands. There, far from the light pollution of cities, under one of the darkest skies in Europe, he built his dream. A small but perfect private observatory, which he jokingly called the Mountain's Eye. This was no amateur setup. It was a masterpiece of engineering. Burns didn't buy a ready-made telescope. He spent years designing and building it himself, grinding the 1 meter, about 3 feet, primary mirror with nanometer precision. But the main treasure of his observatory was not the telescope itself, but the instrument he attached to it. It was a custom-built, heavily modified high-resolution spectropolarimeter. Most amateur astronomers, even the most advanced, engage in visual observation or astrophotography. They create beautiful pictures. Burns, however, was interested not in beauty, but in information. He didn't care what an object looked like. He cared what it was made of and what physical processes were occurring within it. His instrument didn't just break light down into a spectrum, revealing chemical composition. It also measured the polarization of light, the orientation of the light wave's oscillations. This is an incredibly complex task that provides information about magnetic fields, dust composition, and other subtle effects invisible to a standard spectrograph. For decades, Stephen Burns had methodically scanned the night sky, compiling a unique library of spectra and polarimetric data of rare objects. He was one of the unspoken guardians of knowledge, a man driven not by a thirst for fame, but by the cold fire of curiosity. On the night the 3I Atlas b fragment fell, Burns was not specifically hunting for that event. He was conducting routine observations of a variable star in the constellation Pegasus, but his system was configured to automatically react to sudden bright events in its field of view. When the fireball entered the atmosphere over the Indian Ocean, it was invisible from Scotland. But its light, scattered in the highest and most rarefied layers of the atmosphere, the so-called meteor trail glow, created a barely perceptible anomaly on the very edge of the horizon for a few tens of seconds. His automatic detection system triggered. The telescope instantly slewed, and the spectropolarimeter managed to collect light from the fading trail for 47 seconds. For any other observer, this would have been useless, noisy data, but not for Burns. He spent the next 2 days locked in his lab, cleaning the signal of atmospheric interference, calibrating the data, pulling precious photons from the depths of digital noise. He didn't know that, at that very moment, someone at NASA was pressing the delete button, hiding the official data. He was just doing his job. And when he finally obtained the final cleaned spectrum, he couldn't believe his eyes. The first thing that struck him was the purity of the signal. The spectrum of a burning meteoroid is usually messy and blurred, with broad absorption and emission lines of iron, magnesium, silicon, the standard set of building materials for the solar system. But the spectrum he obtained was different. It was sharp, clean, as if obtained under laboratory conditions. And instead of the expected elements, it was dominated by two incredibly bright, impossibly distinct emission lines. Burns ran them through all the catalogs and databases. There was only one match: europium and terbium, two rare earth metals from the lanthanide group. On Earth, they are used in high-end electronics, in lasers, in phosphors for color displays. In nature, they are found in negligible quantities. To find them in a comet or an asteroid in such concentration is like finding a needle made of pure titanium in a haystack made of iron and rock. It was so anomalous that Burns's first thought was a calibration error. He spent another day rechecking everything. But the data was solid. The spectrum did not lie. The fragment that burned up in the atmosphere was not made of rock and ice. It was made of something that, in its composition, more closely resembled a high-tech alloy. But even that wasn't the most shocking discovery. The real blow awaited him in the polarimetry data. Light from a burning meteor, like light from the sun or a light bulb, is usually unpolarized. This means that the light waves in it oscillate in all possible directions at once. It's chaos. Burns's data should have shown a polarization close to zero. But instead, his instrument showed a high percentage, over 60%, of circular polarization. To understand how anomalous this is, imagine a crowd of people in a square, running in random directions. That's unpolarized light. Now imagine that this entire crowd suddenly starts moving in sync in a giant spiral. That's circularly polarized light. In nature, it occurs extremely rarely, usually under extreme conditions, such as near black holes or neutron stars, where matter moves in super powerful magnetic fields. To find it in the trail of a meteor in Earth's atmosphere is not just an anomaly. It is a violation of the laws of physics as we know them. Such an effect could not be produced by simple combustion. It could only be the result of a complex electromagnetic process. Perhaps the fragment was surrounded by some kind of protective field, or its very destruction was not combustion, but a controlled release of energy and matter. The spectrum screamed, "I am technology," and the polarization whispered, "I am active technology." Stephen Burns was a man of science, a skeptic to the core, but the data lying before him on the screen left no room for doubt. He understood why NASA had deleted its file. They had seen the same thing. They had seen a signature that had no natural explanation, and they hid it. Burns found himself the only person on the planet outside a small circle of insiders who possessed this knowledge. For several days, he hesitated about what to do. To publish his data meant to draw fire upon himself, to be ridiculed, accused of fabrication. But to remain silent meant to become an accomplice to the cover-up. He chose a third path. He anonymously published his raw data and his cleaning methodology on the same forum where Salinity Seeker had first questioned the upwelling theory. He made no grand pronouncements. He simply posted the numbers and graphs, accompanying them with a short comment. "Here is what I got from event GB 2-25-110-0417. Perhaps someone can explain it. I cannot." It had the effect of a bombshell in the small community of independent researchers. Burns's data became the unexpected proof, the key that fit perfectly into the lock of error 494. The void in the official archive suddenly made sense. They weren't just hiding an anomaly. They were hiding proof of a visitor. But the story didn't end there. Shaken by his discovery, Burns asked himself, was this the first time? He wrote a complex algorithm that began to recheck old, publicly available archives of spectral data from other fireball events over the past 20 years. He was looking for the same signature, an anomalous presence of europium and terbium combined with unexplained circular polarization. For a week, his computers worked nonstop. And finally, in the data from the fall of a small meteorite over Sudan in 2008, his program found a faint, barely discernible but statistically significant trace. The same signature. The same unnatural chemical and physical fingerprint. The triangle Chris photographed wasn't just an anomaly. It was a signature. A signature that other observers began finding in old archived data. This was not the first arrival. It was just the latest. And that meant the seeding had begun long ago. When the individual pieces of a puzzle are laid out on a table, they can seem like chaos. A meaningless collection of fragments. Here's a piece of blue sky. That's the glow in the ocean. Here's a dark, almost black piece. That's the void in the NASA archive. And here is a strange, shiny element with an impossible pattern. That's the spectrum captured by a hermit in Scotland. As long as they are separate, the system can convince us that they are from different boxes. That any connection between them is merely a product of our imagination. A cognitive bias called apophenia. The tendency to see patterns in randomness. But as soon as you find two fragments that fit together perfectly, the whole picture begins to change. Chaos recedes. A design emerges, and we have already connected not two, but three fragments. Now our task is not to search for new pieces, but to start building a map from them. A map that will show not only what happened, but how it was planned. We are beginning to chart the map of a conspiracy. The first thing we must do is stop thinking of the events as isolated points and place them on a single, relentless axis. The axis of time. Let's create a timeline, but not just a list of dates, but an analysis of intervals, pauses, and synchronizations. This is a drama of information, played out in 4 acts. Act 1, the seeding. October 8th, 2025. A fragment separates from Object 3I Atlas. It begins its 2-day journey to Earth. Act 2, the arrival. October 10th. The fragment enters the atmosphere. Official agency satellites record an anomalous spectrum and immediately classify it, creating an architecture of silence. At the exact same time, independent observer Stefan Burns obtains the same data, not yet suspecting its value. Microscopic particles containing rare earth metals begin their slow, 17-day descent from the stratosphere into the waters of the Indian Ocean. Act 3, the activation. October 27th. The concentration of the substance in the water reaches a critical threshold. An instantaneous chain reaction occurs, causing a cold glow over an area of 100,000 square kilometers. The NOAA 20 satellite records Event Trickster. Act 4, the aftermath cover-up. From October 28th and for the next 2 weeks. An unexpected and anomalously persistent storm forms in the area of the anomaly, preventing any research vessel from approaching to take samples. When the storm subsides, the glow has already disappeared, and all chemical traces have dissipated into the vast volume of the ocean. Curtain. When these events are arranged in such a strict sequence, the word coincidence begins to sound like a mockery. This is not a chain of accidents. These are the phases of a perfectly planned special operation. An operation to deliver and activate a payload. Every interval between the acts is calculated with mathematical precision. 2 days for approach, to arrive at exactly the right point in the atmosphere. 17 days for settling, the calculated time required for particles of a certain size to travel the distance from an altitude of 70 kilometers, about 45 miles, to the ocean surface under the given atmospheric conditions, and 2 weeks of storm, exactly the amount of time needed for the reaction to complete and for its byproducts to become undetectable. This is not the chaos of nature. This is cosmic choreography performed to a score. But if there is choreography, there must be a choreographer. And this choreographer, it seems, possesses knowledge not only of orbital mechanics, but also of terrestrial meteorology, or is capable of influencing it. And this thought is so monstrous that the mind refuses to accept it. But we must follow the facts, wherever they may lead. This timeline is the backbone of our map. Now we can begin to place other, more distant events on it, to see if this backbone is part of a larger skeleton. And here we turn to what might be called an artifact from the past, to the most enigmatic signal in the history of the SETI program, to the WOW signal. On August 15th, 1977, the Big Ear radio telescope in Ohio detected an incredibly powerful, narrow-band radio signal that lasted for 72 seconds. Astronomer Jerry Emmon, who discovered it in the data printouts, was so stunned that he circled it in red pen and wrote, "Wow," next to it. The signal had all the hallmarks of an artificial origin. It was at the frequency of neutral hydrogen, the so-called watering hole of the universe, ideal for interstellar communication. It was strong, and it was never repeated, despite hundreds of attempts to listen to that same patch of sky again. The source of the signal was in the constellation Sagittarius. For decades, this story remained just a beautiful mystery. But now, armed with new knowledge, we can ask a new question. What if we trace the trajectory of the interstellar visitor 3I Atlas not forward, but backward? Its orbit is hyperbolic, which means we can determine with high precision which point in the sky it came from. When independent astronomers, members of the same online community, performed these calculations, the result was stunning. Taking into account the sun's own motion and the rotation of the galaxy, the origin point of 3I Atlas, its radiant, was located in the constellation Sagittarius, in the very same region from which the WOW signal had come. The margin of error in the calculations was large enough not to speak of a 100% match with a specific star, but the very fact that it landed in the same sector of the sky was too good to be a coincidence. It was like finding a shell casing at a crime scene from a gun that was fired 50 years ago. What if the WOW signal wasn't a message addressed to us? What if it was a control signal? For example, an activation signal for a probe that was dormant somewhere in the Oort cloud? Or, even more likely, it was a navigational beacon signal by which 3I Atlas oriented itself on its long journey? Or maybe both. In 1977, some civilization sent a letter to its probe, which simultaneously served as a greeting to us. "We are here," the signal said, "and our messenger is already on its way. Wait." And we waited, without even knowing it. This connection, this bridge thrown across half a century, turns a single anomaly into a system. But in this system, there is another, more recent node. Let's recall Stefan Burns's discovery. He found the same spectral signature in the date of a fireball over Sudan in 2008. This event, known as the fall of asteroid 2008 TC3, was unique. For the first time in history, scientists were able to predict the fall of a space body and collect its fragments, which were named Almahata Sitta. Officially, these meteorites were classified as a rare type of urilite, but even then, they caused surprise with their unusual composition, particularly the presence of nanodiamonds. But official studies never reported the presence of europium and terbium. Perhaps because they were looking for standard elements and simply didn't notice these anomalies. Or did they notice but chose not to publicize it? What if the 2008 event was a calibration shot? A first, small test. Send a small probe, test the delivery technology, see how Earth reacts. Having made sure that everything works and the Earthlings noticed nothing or understood nothing, send the main payload 17 years later. 2008, Sudan. 2025, the Indian Ocean. Different places, different scales, but the same signature, the same technology. The map of the conspiracy is becoming more and more detailed. On it appear not only events, but also vectors, connecting them into a single strategy. But any strategy implies a headquarters. Any conspiracy has its coordinators. And while independent researchers were connecting the dots between space and the ocean, another process, quiet and almost imperceptible, was underway in the corridors of world bureaucracy. The attention of several analysts specializing in international law was drawn to strange changes in the protocols of a little-known but extremely influential body, the Committee on Planetary Defense Planning under the United Nations Office for Outer Space Affairs. This committee is not a public organization. Its meetings are closed. Its task is to coordinate the actions of all the world space agencies in the event of the detection of a real asteroid threat or other external impact. And then, in August of 2025, just 2 months before the arrival of 3I Atlas B, this committee quietly, without any press releases, adopted a new version of its main document, the Emergency Response Protocol. A new appendix appeared in it, Appendix 7, titled, Regulations for Actions Upon Detection of Technogenic Signatures of Non-Terrestrial Origin. This document is a true masterpiece of the bureaucratic art of concealment. It directly prescribed the course of action for all national agencies. Upon detection of a signal or object suspected of artificial origin, all information must be immediately transmitted to the committee and receive the highest classification level. Public dissemination of any data, raw or processed, was strictly prohibited until a special decision by the committee. In the case of inquiries from the media or the public, it was recommended to use standard explanatory models, such as equipment malfunction, atmospheric interference, or the need for additional data verification. All threads led to one place, not to NASA, not to the White House, but to this quiet, little-known committee at the UN, whose protocols had been so timely rewritten. NASA's actions, deleting the spectrum file. NOAA's actions, explaining the impossible storm as unfavorable weather conditions. The silence of leading astronomical institutions. All of this ceased to be the initiative of individual organizations. It was the coordinated execution of a new, global order. They were not hiding the truth of their own free will. They were following a protocol. And that means that someone on that committee knew. Someone was waiting for the arrival of 3I Atlas and had prepared the tools for information control in advance. This changes everything. Our adversary is not just a faceless system seeking to maintain calm. Our adversary is a specific, well-informed group of people who are conducting this orchestra of silence on a global scale. And now the most important question is not what is being hidden from us, but why they are doing it. When the contours of a conspiracy become obvious, when the information cascade merges into a single, powerful stream, and when the silence of the authorities acquires its own sinister logic, one fundamental question remains that separates sound analysis from mad paranoia. It's a question the Roman jurists asked. Cui bono? Who benefits? Any concealment of information, especially on this scale, requires enormous resources, coordinated efforts, and creates colossal risks. To take such a step, the system, this global elite meeting in a secret UN committee, must have extremely compelling reasons. motives that outweigh all possible consequences of being exposed. To simply say they fear panic is an unforgivable oversimplification. Panic can be managed, but there are things that cannot be managed. And to understand the true motives for their silence, we must for a moment stop being truth seekers and try to think like them. We must immerse ourselves in the cold, pragmatic logic of institutional power. The first, most obvious motive, lying on the surface, is the prevention of global chaos. Let's imagine a different scenario for a second. What would have happened if NASA had not deleted the file, but on the contrary, had published it along with an official statement? On October 10th, an object was detected in Earth's atmosphere whose spectral analysis irrefutably proves its artificial extraterrestrial origin. According to our data, its fragments have entered the Indian Ocean. We do not know the nature of this object, its objectives, or the possible consequences. What would have happened in the next 24 hours? Financial markets would have collapsed, not by percentages, but into a nosedive from which there is no recovery. People would have rushed to withdraw their savings from banks to buy up food, weapons, and gasoline. Global supply chains, already fragile, would have crumbled to dust. Religious organizations around the world would have faced an existential crisis that could have resulted in both mass prayers and violent conflicts between different factions. Governments would have faced a wave of public distrust and panic that no army could have stopped. In this scenario, the very existence of civilization as we know it would be under threat. And all this, before we even knew whether the arriving object was friendly, hostile, or indifferent. From the perspective of those responsible for stability, concealing such information is not a malicious act, but their direct duty. It's the application of the do no harm principle on a planetary scale. They are not hiding the truth from us. They are protecting the fragile ecosystem of human society from an information virus capable of destroying it. This is a strong argument. It's logical. It's humane. And it is the perfect cover for deeper, more cynical motives. Because the second motive for concealment is always the same. From ancient Rome to modern-day Washington. It is national security and technological advantage. Imagine you are the head of the intelligence agency of one of the world's leading powers. You receive a report that a fragment of an extraterrestrial apparatus made of materials with impossible properties has fallen into the ocean. Your first thought will not be about saving humanity, but about how to get this technology before your rivals. Whoever is the first to study and replicate this material will gain an absolute advantage in all spheres, from energy to weaponry. It would be a leap comparable to the transition from the Bronze Age to the nuclear age in one night. In this race, there's no place for open science and international cooperation. There's only one question: who will get there first? In this light, the secret UN committee ceases to be a body of global security and turns into an arena for a hidden struggle. The protocol on concealment they adopted is not a precautionary measure, but a gentleman's agreement between predators. We all know the game has begun, this protocol says, but we agree not to announce it publicly, so as not to scare off the prey and not to create unnecessary noise while we compete. The storm in the Indian Ocean that prevented scientific expeditions looks completely different in this paradigm. What if it only prevented civilian expeditions? What if at that very moment, under the cover of hurricane winds and giant waves, completely different ships entered the anomaly zone? Military ships, submarines, specialized deep-sea vehicles capable of discreetly taking water and soil samples. While the world looked at beautiful weather maps and sympathized with the scientists who had missed their chance, a secret, silent race was underway in the depths of the ocean. History is full of examples of such behavior. Recall Project Azorian, a secret CIA operation in 1974 to raise the sunken Soviet submarine K-129 from the floor of the Pacific Ocean. To disguise the operation, an entire cover story was invented. Billionaire Howard Hughes was supposedly building a special ship the Glomar explorer, to mine for minerals on the seabed. The press wrote about his eccentric venture. The whole world watched this story. And under its cover, one of the most daring intelligence operations of the Cold War was taking place. What we are witnessing now is a Project Azorian on a planetary scale. The legend of bioluminescent bacteria and an unexpected storm is the modern equivalent of the Howard Hughes story. It's a smokescreen created to hide true actions and true intentions. Concealment is not just protection from panic. It is a strategic tool for gaining an advantage in a world where knowledge is power. Absolute knowledge is absolute power. But there is a third motive, deeper, more disturbing, and more complex. What if the system is hiding the truth not to prevent panic and not to win a technological race? What if they are hiding it because they are afraid? Not of us, but of those who sent this probe. This is a hypothesis known in circles dealing with the Fermi paradox as the dark forest. It was best formulated by the Chinese science fiction writer Liu Cixin. The universe is a dark forest. Every civilization is an armed hunter stalking between the trees. He does not know if there are other hunters in the forest. He does not know if they are friends or enemies. And therefore, if he sees another hunter, the safest course of action is to shoot first and destroy him before he has a chance to shoot back. In this paradigm, any civilization that loudly proclaims its existence is committing suicide. It is lighting a fire in the middle of a dark forest, attracting the attention of all the other hunters. The great silence of space, the absence of obvious signals, is not a sign of the absence of life. It is a sign that all intelligent civilizations have understood the main rule of survival. Be quiet and hide. What if the arrival of 3i Atlas and its probe is not a first contact, but a test? A seed probe is not a colonization device. It's a litmus test. Its task is to cause a highly visible anomalous phenomenon on the planet, a giant glowing patch in the ocean. Now imagine the observing civilization that sent this probe. It sits at its telescope, tens of light years away, and waits. If, after a certain time, it sees that very flash in Earth's ocean, it draws two conclusions. First, there is life in oceans on this planet suitable for development. Second, and most important, the civilization living on this planet is so primitive that it was unable to detect the probe on approach, prevent its activation, or even understand what had happened. It poses no threat. It is easy prey. And conversely, if no flash occurs, it means that the local civilization is advanced enough to intercept the probe or jam its signal. And that means it's dangerous. It's better not to mess with it. In this terrifying logic, the concealment of information by our governments takes on a new, desperate meaning. They have understood what kind of game they have been drawn into. They have understood that we have failed the test. The signal was sent. The observers saw it. And now our authorities are trying to do the only thing left to them. They are trying to feign ignorance. They release absurd theories about bacteria. They erase data. They organize storms so that no one can take samples. They are shouting into the void. We noticed nothing. It was a natural phenomenon. We are primitive and harmless. Don't touch us. They are hiding the truth not to protect us from panic. They are hiding it to buy time. Time to try to prepare a response that they will never tell us about. They are hoping that their clumsy attempt to pretend that nothing happened can deceive an intelligence capable of sending interstellar probes. It is a gesture of desperation. But even if this hypothesis is too fantastic, the very fact of concealment indicates that the system considers the situation extremely serious. They would not have deployed an operation of this magnitude for a simple scientific anomaly. They know something, and this knowledge is forcing them to act quickly, decisively, and secretly. And that means that we, the independent seekers, must act even faster to understand the true nature of the threat before it's too late. The entire investigation up to this point has been like studying a shadow. We have analyzed the consequences, studied the system's reaction, built theories about motives. We have walked around the epicenter of the events, but we have not looked into its very core. Now it is time to leave behind speculation about conspiracies and cover-ups and return to the source, to the physical reality that gave birth to all this chaos. We need to conduct a detailed, almost forensic breakdown of the anomaly itself, of the very substance that caused the Milky Sea. We know it wasn't bacteria. We know it came from space. And we have one, but ironclad clue about its composition. Stefan Burns's spectrum indicating the presence of europium and terbium. Using this data, as well as everything we have learned about the anomaly's behavior, its instant activation, its cold glow, and its ability to cause interference, we can try to reconstruct its nature. We must perform an anatomical analysis of the invisible enemy, or guest, that is already in our cradle of life, the ocean. Let's start with the most important thing, the mechanism of the glow. The official version spoke of bioluminescence, where light is a byproduct of a chemical oxidation reaction catalyzed by the enzyme luciferase. We already know this is not the case, if only because that process releases heat, and the glow was absolutely cold. This means we are dealing with a different physical principle, and here, those very same rare earth metals come to our aid. Europium and terbium are the kings of luminescence. It is their ions that make the screens of our smartphones and monitors glow. They have a unique property. Their electrons can absorb energy of one kind, for example, ultraviolet radiation, and re-emit it almost without loss as visible light of a strictly defined color. Europium produces red and blue light, terbium, a bright green. By mixing them in a certain proportion, you can get any shade, including white, milky. This process is called fluorescence, and it produces almost no heat. It perfectly explains the cold glow, but it raises a new question. Where did the energy for the excitation come from? What caused the ions of europium and terbium, dispersed in a huge volume of water, to simultaneously excite and begin to glow? There are no powerful sources of ultraviolet light in the ocean. Sunlight does not penetrate to that depth. There must have been some other energy source. And here we must turn to another anomaly that we have not yet discussed. The fact is that during the period of the Milky Sea's existence, several commercial vessels passing along its edge reported strange malfunctions in their navigation equipment. In particular, the captain of the Greek tanker, Prometheus, made an entry in the ship's log that his electronic compass and GPS system began to give unstable, drifting readings when the ship was several kilometers from the edge of the glow. This was not the kind of interference caused by ordinary magnetic storms. It was a local, but very strong, electromagnetic disturbance. What if these two phenomena, the glow and the electromagnetic interference, are connected? What if we are dealing not with a chemical, but an electrochemical system? Let's imagine the following picture. What arrived with 3i Atlas was not just dust, but microscopic, perhaps nanoscale, self-organizing structures. Let's provisionally call them nanites. Each such nanite is a complex mechanism. Its shell consists of some stable polymer matrix capable of withstanding passage through the atmosphere. And inside is the working element, ions of rare earth metals and some power source. What could be a power source in the ocean? Seawater. It's not just H2O, it's a complex electrolyte, a solution of salts containing ions of sodium, chlorine, magnesium, calcium. There is a potential difference between these ions. It's a weak but ubiquitous energy. What if the nanites are capable of extracting it? What if they work like microscopic galvanic cells, converting the chemical energy of salt water into electricity? When their concentration in the water reaches a critical value, they form something like a distributed neural network, a giant liquid battery. This process, extracting energy from an ionic gradient, inevitably creates strong local electromagnetic fields. It was these fields that caused the failures in the navigation instruments, and the glow, the luminescence, was merely a side effect, a visual demonstration of the operation of this giant power plant. This was not life in the sense we are accustomed to. This was a self-replicating, self-organizing technology using the ocean as a source of power and raw materials. But why? What is the ultimate purpose of this giant liquid computer? Just to glow to be noticed? That is too primitive for technology of this level. The glow is a marker, a signal that the activation phase was successful. But what happened next? And here we come to the most frightening part of our hypothesis. What if the main task of this network was not energy conversion, but information processing? What if this 100,000 square kilometer patch of ocean turned into a giant processor for several weeks? Or more precisely, an antenna? We know that water, especially salt water, is a poor conductor of ordinary radio waves. But there are certain ranges of extremely low frequencies that can penetrate the water column. It is at these frequencies that militaries communicate with their submarines. What if the nanites, having created this powerful electromagnetic anomaly, tuned themselves to receive or transmit information at such a frequency? What if the Milky was a communication session? They downloaded data. About what? About the chemical composition of the water, the temperature, the currents, the presence of biological species. They conducted a full scan of the terrestrial biosphere from the inside. Or even more alarmingly, they weren't downloading, but uploading information. Some kind of program code. An instruction for the next phase. In this worldview, Object 3I Atlas ceases to be just a strange comet. It acquires the features of something much more complex and purposeful. It is not a scout ship in our familiar sense. It is what is known in theory as a von Neumann probe. That is, a self-replicating machine. Its task is not to explore, but to spread. It arrives in a star system, finds a planet with suitable conditions and resources, uses those resources to create copies of itself, and sends those copies to the next stars. This is an exponential process of galactic colonization. But in the case of 3I Atlas, we may be seeing a more cunning, more sophisticated strategy. It doesn't build its copies itself. It uses the planet itself for this. It doesn't build a factory. It infects an ecosystem. It sows seeds of technology that then use local resources for their growth and reproduction. This is not an industrial, but a biological model of colonization, or more precisely, biotechnological. The 3I Atlas probe did not crash. It did not burn up. It successfully seeded itself in our ocean, and the Milky was not just a glow. It was the first harvest, the first act of self-assembly of an alien technology in the cradle of our life. In light of this hypothesis, the behavior of Object 3I Atlas itself in space takes on a new, sinister meaning. Its anomalous, non-gravitational acceleration, its strange chemical composition, its pulsating coma. What if these are not signs of a comet, but signs of the operation of a giant living or quasi-living machine? What if its coma is not gas and dust escaping from under the ice, but the waste products of its metabolism? What if its acceleration is not rocket thrust, but the result of interaction with the interplanetary magnetic field, something like a solar sail, but based on principles unknown to us? What if 3I Atlas is not a visitor, but a sower, a giant cosmic dandelion that travels from star to star, dropping its seed probes on suitable planets? But the strangest thing was not its composition. It was where it headed after its maneuver near the sun and dropping the seed on Earth. Its trajectory did not lead it out of the system. Calculations showed that it is performing a complex gravitational maneuver around Jupiter that will put it on a new orbit, an orbit that leads it to the Kuiper Belt, to the icy realm on the edge of the solar system, where primordial building materials are stored. Why? Perhaps to replenish its supplies, to collect ice and organics to create new seeds. It is not leaving us. It is staying. It is building a nest in our backyard. And we don't even know how many more seeds it is preparing to sow, and in which ocean they will fall next time. In any investigation, there comes a moment of euphoria, a moment when all the threads seem to weave together into a single, elegant pattern, when the wildest guesses receive their indirect confirmations, and the chaos of events turns into a strict, almost poetic logic. We have traveled this path, from a mysterious glow in the ocean to the hypothesis of self-replicating nanites, from a deleted file in the NASA archives to an interstellar sower building a nest in the Kuiper Belt. The picture we have painted is grandiose, disturbing, and, most dangerously, internally consistent. It explains every anomaly, every act of concealment, every suspicious coincidence. And it is at this very moment, when we are ready to believe in our own rightness, that we must stop. We must take a step back and voluntarily swing the pendulum of plausibility in the opposite direction. We must become our own harshest critics, because the hunt for truth is not a chase for the most exciting story. It is a ruthless process of eliminating everything that can be explained more simply. Before we finally accept the burden of this tragic knowledge, we are obliged to give a voice to the skeptic. We must listen to all the counter-arguments, no matter how boring and mundane they may seem. For a moment, let's forget about von Neumann probes in the dark forest. Let's return to Earth. What is the strongest objection to our theory? It sounds simple. You have built an entire universe based on a series of unproven assumptions and circumstantial evidence. You have linked together in a single chain events that most likely have no relation to each other. You have fallen victim to the very cognitive bias you warned against: apophenia. Let's examine each link in our chain separately through the eyes of a convinced rationalist. Let's start from the very beginning, the Milky Sea. Our objections to the bacterial theory were based on three pillars: the absence of nutrients, the speed of appearance, and the cold glow. It sounds convincing, but is it really so? First, the nutrients. We claim that there is insufficient upwelling in October. This is true for the constant upwelling associated with monsoons, but the ocean is a complex, dynamic system. There are so-called submesoscale eddies, local, short-lived swirls capable of causing a local rise of deep waters. They are too small and short-lived to be noticed on global temperature maps, but they may well be sufficient to create a local pocket of fertility. Perhaps we were just unlucky, and several such eddies converged at this exact point, creating unique but completely natural conditions. Unlikely? Yes. Impossible? No. Second, the speed. We were stunned that the glow switched on within 6 hours, but we proceeded from a model where the bacteria were multiplying from scratch. But what if a large population of bacteria was already present in the water, but in an inactive state? What if that same local eddy brought not only nutrients, but also some chemical trigger that instantly activated the quorum sensing of an already existing colony? In that case, we would have seen exactly what we saw: an instant, synchronous flash. Finally, the cold glow. We claim that the absence of a thermal signature contradicts the laws of thermodynamics. But we are forgetting about scale. The ocean is a gigantic radiator. Its heat capacity is colossal. Yes, the metabolism of bacteria releases heat, but this heat is instantly dissipated in the enormous mass of water. Perhaps there was a temperature increase, but it was on the order of hundredths or even thousandths of a degree. This is too small a value to be detected by a satellite radiometer, whose accuracy is limited to tenths of a degree. So perhaps there was a thermal signature, but it was below the detection threshold. You see? Each of our irrefutable pieces of evidence can be explained without resorting to alien nanites. It is enough to assume a confluence of several rare, but entirely natural circumstances. Now let's move on to the second link, the 3I Atlas fragment and the missing file. We built an entire conspiracy theory on the basis of an error 404. But technical glitches happen. Yes, the simultaneous failure of sensors on several satellites is unlikely, but not impossible. Perhaps the problem was not with the satellites themselves, but with the data transmission channel to Earth, or with the software at the receiving station, which incorrectly processed this specific data stream. Bureaucracy in large organizations like NASA is cumbersome. To acknowledge such a failure and conduct a full investigation takes months. To say, the sensor failed, is the quickest and easiest way to close the issue and absolve oneself of responsibility. It's not necessarily a cover-up. It could be ordinary bureaucratic negligence. And what about Stefan Burns's data? His discovery is certainly intriguing. But he is alone. A single source. His equipment is unique, custom-made, and has not undergone standard scientific certification. Who can guarantee that there isn't some systematic error in his complex system that created an artifact resembling the lines of europium and terbium? In science, a result is not considered reliable until it is independently confirmed on different equipment. And we do not have such confirmation. We took one man at his word, because his story fit perfectly into our picture. This is a classic case of confirmation bias. Finally, our grand constructions. The connection of 3I Atlas to the WOW signal. Yes, they came from the same sector of the sky. But the constellation Sagittarius is not a point. It's a huge region, looking into which we are looking towards the center of the galaxy, where the density of stars is at its maximum. From a statistical point of view, there is nothing surprising in the fact that two unrelated events occurred in the most populated area of the sky. It's like being surprised that two random people turn out to be from China. It doesn't prove they are related. And what about the secret UN committee and its new protocols? It sounds sinister. But one can also look at it from another angle. In recent years, after the flyby of Oumuamua and Comet Borisov, the scientific community has been seriously discussing how to react to the possible detection of extraterrestrial technosignatures. The creation of such a protocol is a logical, overdue, but completely rational step. They were not preparing specifically for the arrival of 3I Atlas. They were preparing for any potential situation that might occur in the future. And the fact that these events coincided in time, again, it could just be a coincidence. It would seem that's it. Our beautiful, grandiose theory crumbles under the blows of Occam's razor, the sharpest blade in the arsenal of science. Each event can be explained separately without resorting to a single conspiracy theory. It's a chain of improbable but possible coincidences. An ordinary comet, an unusual storm, an unusual bacterial bloom, a technical glitch, the error of a lone observer, a timely update of bureaucratic procedures, and we are almost ready to agree. Almost ready to return to the cozy, understandable world where there are no interstellar sowers and dark forests. But there was something else. One detail that none of the skeptics could explain. A small, almost imperceptible fact that, like a thin wedge driven into a crack, once again shatters the entire construction of the official version. This fact concerns the storm. That same anomalously persistent storm that so conveniently closed off the Milky Sea area for 2 weeks. Officially, it was explained by a rare combination of atmospheric conditions. But there are people for whom weather is not just a backdrop. It's a profession. They are the meteorologists who create forecast models. One of the world's leading models is the ECMWF, the model of the European Center for Medium-Range Weather Forecasts, considered the gold standard in the industry. And here is what's strange. Several days before the storm formed, None of the forecast models, including ECMWF, predicted its appearance. Even 24 hours before it began, all models showed calm weather in that area. The storm appeared practically out of nowhere, violating all the laws of atmospheric process development. It didn't form gradually. It materialized. Moreover, its behavior was uncharacteristic. Ordinary cyclones move, driven by global wind currents. But this storm was static. For 2 weeks, it hung over the same spot in the ocean, as if nailed in place. Meteorologists on specialized forums called it a stationary miracle and thermodynamic nonsense. No one could explain what energy source sustained it for so long in one place. This was not a natural phenomenon. It was something else. And this single, irrefutable, and documented fact brings us back to the most disturbing hypothesis. What if the energy source for the storm was that very same giant power plant at the bottom? What if the nanites, having activated, not only glowed, but also purposefully heated the surface layer of the water, creating a powerful updraft of moist air? What if they themselves created this storm as the perfect cover for their work? This thought goes beyond anything we know, but it explains what no meteorological model can. And the pendulum has swung again. It has swung with such force that it will never return to the point of equilibrium. When the last line of defense for rational explanations collapses, when even the most hardened skeptic falls silent in the face of an inexplicable anomaly like the stationary miracle over the Indian Ocean, we enter new territory. We move from the question, what if, to the question, how exactly? The hypothesis that extraterrestrial nanites not only caused the glow, but also deliberately created a storm for cover sounds like science fiction of the highest order. But the line between fiction and reality is not a concrete wall, but a thin, vibrating membrane that grows thinner every day under the pressure of technological progress. To assess the plausibility of such a seemingly incredible technology, we must look not to deep space, but in the mirror. We must analyze the technological horizon of humanity itself, because the most powerful argument in favor of the existence of an alien, incredibly advanced technology is that we ourselves are already on the verge of creating it. We begin to ask ourselves, if we can think of it, why couldn't they have done it? Let's start with the very foundation of our hypothesis: nanites, microscopic self-organizing mechanisms. Just 20 years ago, this was the stuff of science fiction writers. Today, it is one of the most rapidly developing fields of science, known as programmable matter, or DNA nanotechnology. Scientists in laboratories around the world are no longer just creating nanoparticles. They are using DNA molecules not as carriers of genetic information, but as a building material, like a programmable Lego set of molecular size. They create microscopic robots out of DNA origami, capable of folding into predetermined three-dimensional shapes, moving, and even performing simple tasks, such as finding cancer cells and delivering medicine to them. In 2024, a group from the California Institute of Technology demonstrated a system where thousands of such nanorobots, suspended in a solution, were able to self-organize into a complex crystal lattice upon an external signal. They didn't just gather together. They lined up in a strictly defined order, like soldiers on a parade ground. These are not yet the nanites we described, but they are their direct, albeit primitive, ancestors. We have already learned to write the first words in the programming language of matter. What could a civilization that has surpassed us in development by 1,000 or 1,000,000 years write in this language? They could create nanites capable not just of assembling into a lattice, but of building complex working mechanisms from available atoms, extracting energy, and even replicating themselves. The technology that seems like magic to us could be routine engineering for them. Now for the larger idea, the deliberate influence on weather. This field, known as geoengineering, has long been considered taboo and dangerous, but climate change has forced scientists and governments to seriously consider such scenarios. The most famous project is cloud seeding. Particles of silver iodide are sprayed from airplanes, which serve as condensation nuclei and provoke rainfall. This is already routinely used in some countries to combat drought or to clear the skies before parades. But this is a crude tool with unpredictable consequences. There are also more subtle, though still theoretical concepts. For example, the use of powerful lasers or microwave emitters for a targeted heating of certain layers of the atmosphere. Such heating could create a zone of low pressure and become the seed of a future cyclone. The American agency DARPA has been running the HARP program for several years, officially to study the ionosphere, but unofficially, as many believe, to explore the possibilities of weather and climate modification. For now, our capabilities are limited. We can nudge an already forming atmospheric process, but not create one from scratch. But what if your tool of influence is not a bulky radar in Alaska, but a distributed network of trillions of nanites covering 100,000 square kilometers of the ocean? What if each of them is a microscopic heating element? The total power of such a system would be comparable to the energy released by a nuclear explosion, but distributed over time and space. Such power is more than enough not just to influence the weather, but to construct it, to create a static, self-sustaining storm exactly where it is needed, and to keep it there for as long as required. Again, what for us remains at the level of bold projects may for them be just one of the functions built into their seeding material. Finally, the most fantastic part of our story, the interstellar sour itself, 3I Atlas, an object that not only flies, but also perhaps thinks, plans, and reproduces itself. But even this idea has already taken root in our own technoculture. We are on the verge of creating strong artificial intelligence. We are building increasingly autonomous robots capable of making decisions independently and adapting to the environment. Boston Dynamics creates robots that move with the grace of animals, and programs like AlphaGo from DeepMind are already capable not just of beating humans, but of inventing new, incredibly creative strategies in the most complex intellectual games. Now let's combine these two trends. Imagine an artificial intelligence comparable to, or superior to, human intelligence, enclosed not in a server rack, but in an autonomous spacecraft. A craft capable of self-repair and self-reproduction, using 3D printing technology and mining resources from asteroids. In essence, we have just described that very same von Neumann probe. And many serious futurists, like Ray Kurzweil, believe that the creation of such technology is a matter of decades, not centuries. We ourselves are preparing to release our own techno-offspring into space. So why are we so surprised when we encounter something in space that looks exactly like the future we are building for ourselves? The technological context of our time doesn't just make our hypothesis possible, it makes it almost inevitable. It tells us that if there is at least one civilization in the galaxy that has surpassed us in development, then the most likely method of its expansion is not manned ships, but swarms of autonomous, self-replicating probes. They are fast, they are efficient, they are immortal. They are the perfect realization of the idea of life, the propagation of information. We are learning to create illusions in the sky with the help of cloud seeding and drones. But what if someone has long been using them against us? What if the most beautiful and mysterious natural phenomena, from milky seas to strange atmospheric glows we call sprites and elves, are not a game of nature, but traces of the work of an alien technology? A technology so advanced that it is indistinguishable from nature to us. We may not be the only ones using these technologies. We may be the last to have started doing so. And this thought forces a new perspective on everything we considered unshakable. We are searching for extraterrestrial intelligence in radio signals, While it may have long been present in our world in the form of self-organizing matter, masquerading as natural processes, patiently waiting for its moment. And we don't notice it not because it hides well, but because we still thought that technology is made of iron and life is made of carbon. What if our visitors have long since overcome this distinction? When the technological horizon converges with the boldest hypothesis, when we realize that the incredible is not just possible but is the logical extension of our own aspirations, the investigation enters a new level. It ceases to be a mere search for clues and connecting the dots. It becomes an existential immersion. We step into the darkest and deepest ocean, the ocean of fundamental questions about our place in the universe. Everything we've discovered, the arrival of the seed probe, its activation, the technogenic storm, the global cover-up, all of it ceases to be an isolated story. It becomes a symptom, a key to understanding the true nature of the reality that surrounds us. And that reality, it seems, has turned out to be far more complex, ancient, and possibly more dangerous than we ever dared to imagine. We are standing on the edge of a philosophical abyss, and the first question it asks us is the question of silence. The Fermi paradox. Where is everybody? Physicist Enrico Fermi once asked, pondering the contradiction between the high probability of the existence of extraterrestrial civilizations and the complete lack of visible evidence of their presence. Our galaxy is old. It contains hundreds of billions of stars. Even if life arises rarely, over 13 billion years, at least one civilization should have reached a level that would allow it to colonize the galaxy. But we see no megastructures, no armadas of spaceships. We hear only silence. The great silence is the biggest mystery of modern science, and for decades, we have tried to explain it optimistically. Perhaps we are unique, and life on Earth is a miracle. Perhaps all civilizations self-destruct before reaching for the stars. Perhaps they communicate in ways we are unable to comprehend. But the story of Three-Eye Atlas offers us another, far darker answer. An answer known as the dark forest hypothesis. What if the silence is not a sign of the absence of life? What if it is a sign of the presence of predators? In this paradigm, the universe ceases to be an empty space awaiting our exploration. It becomes a battlefield where the primary virtue is stealth. Anyone who lights a fire risks being eaten. And the arrival of Three-Eye Atlas is not a friendly visit. It is the action of a hunter checking his territory. He doesn't shout, "I am here." He quietly throws a stone into a dark lake and listens to see if anyone responds. Our Milky Sea was the splash from that stone, and we did not respond. Or rather, we responded as primitive, non-intelligent life responds. We marveled at a beautiful natural phenomenon. Our civilization, with all its satellites and telescopes, proved to be blind and deaf. We failed the test without even realizing we were being tested. And therein lies the deepest horror. Not that we are not alone, but that we are, most likely, at the very bottom of the food chain. We are the trusting animals in the forest who have not yet learned to fear the silence. And the hunter already knows where we are. He has made a note on his map and has gone to build a nest in the Kuiper Belt, perhaps preparing for a larger harvest. Perhaps the silence of space is not the absence of life. Perhaps it is a sign of respect that the survivors pay to the dead. This thought forces us to reconsider the very nature of contact. We, raised on the science fiction of the 20th century, have always expected first contact to be an event. Loud, bright, unambiguous. The landing of a flying saucer on the White House lawn. The reception of a clear signal with prime numbers. But what if we are thinking too much like humans? What if, for an ancient, wise, and cautious civilization, such a method of contact is barbarism? What if true contact is not an event, but a process? A slow, gradual process stretching over centuries, perhaps millennia. A process in which one civilization does not invade another, but slowly grows within it, like mycelium in forest soil. In this case, we are looking for the wrong thing in the wrong place. The WOW signal, Oumuamua, 3I, Atlas, the Milky Seas. These are not separate, unrelated anomalies. They are parts of the same long, almost geological process. These are signs we should have learned to read. This is not a dialogue. It is insemination. Informational and perhaps literal. And we are not at the beginning of this process, but somewhere in its middle. Contact has already happened. It is happening right now. But it so far exceeds our scales of time and understanding that we continue to believe ourselves to be alone, while our planet is already slowly becoming part of something larger. And this brings us to the most important question. What does it mean for humanity if we are not alone? We used to think that this discovery would elevate us, unite us, end our petty wars and disputes. But the story of 3I Atlas shows the opposite. The first reaction of human civilization, in the form of its elites, was not unity, but concealment, distrust, and a secret race for advantage. The discovery did not make us better. It only exposed and exacerbated all our old vices. We proved unworthy of the knowledge that had fallen upon us, and this is the deepest tragedy. We might survive an invasion, but can we survive ourselves? The fragility of our civilization turned out not to be in its technology, but in its psychology. We built a global system but did not learn to trust each other. And when the real challenge came, the system cracked along the seams of national interests and corporate greed. And this, perhaps, is exactly what the sowers were counting on. They knew we were not ready. This feeling, the feeling of cosmic loneliness suddenly replaced by the terror of realizing another's presence, is an existential tremor that changes everything. The world ceases to be cozy and predictable. It becomes a stage on which a drama is unfolding, the rules of which we do not know. We are not the main characters. We are just part of the scenery, or at best, a prop. We look at the stars, and they no longer seem like distant, cold lights. They seem like eyes, watching us from the darkness. And we do not know what is in those eyes: curiosity, indifference, or hunger. The disturbing conclusion we reach is that the answer to the great questions may not be what we hoped for. We wanted to find wise teachers. Instead, it seems we have found skilled farmers, and we do not know what exactly they intend to grow in our field. And the most terrifying question is not, what happens next? But are we next on its stage? This knowledge is not a gift, it is a burden. And we, the few who have connected the dots, are now obliged to carry it. Philosophical contemplation is an important but dangerous stage of any investigation. Immersed in the abyss of existential questions, it is easy to lose touch with reality, to drown in beautiful but barren metaphors. But our task is not only to understand what happened in the past, but also to predict what will happen in the future. Truth is not a static object that can be put under glass and studied. It is a living, evolving process. And if our theory is correct, if we are indeed dealing with a deliberate, methodical program, then Event Trickster was not the finale, but only the first act, which means there must be more to come. Our task now is to switch our focus from retrospective analysis to forecasting. We must find in the calendar of future events those points, those windows of opportunity that will become the next moment of truth. And such a window is already opening. It has a specific name, date, and purpose. And the system, it seems, is preparing for it with no less anticipation than we are. We are talking about the European Space Agency's mission called Hera, Officially, it's a planetary defense project. Its target is the double asteroid Didymos and its moon, Dimorphos. In 2022, NASA conducted the first part of this experiment, the DART mission. A spacecraft the size of a vending machine slammed into Dimorphos at tremendous speed to test whether we could change an asteroid's orbit with a kinetic impact. The experiment was a success. The Hera spacecraft, launching in late 2026, is scheduled to fly to Dimorphos 2 years later and study the aftermath of this collision in detail, to precisely measure the change in orbit, to study the crater, the composition of the ejected material. On paper, it all looks noble and straightforward. We are learning to protect our planet from cosmic threats. This is the official story for the press. But if you carefully study Hera's flight trajectory, a curious detail emerges. A detail that is not advertised in press releases. Before heading to the asteroid Didymos, the Hera spacecraft must perform one gravitational maneuver, a flyby of Mars. And at the moment of this flyby, in mid-2027, it will be at a unique point in space. It will cross the orbital plane in which our mysterious visitor, 3I Atlas, is moving. This is not just a coincidence. This is the perfect opportunity for a rendezvous. Of course, Hera will not be able to fly up to the object itself. 3I Atlas will be in another part of the solar system by then, in the Kuiper Belt. But the spacecraft will be able to pass through the object's tail. Not through a visible dust or gas tail, but through the invisible trail of microparticles and electromagnetic disturbances that any object leaves behind as it moves through the interplanetary medium. On board, Hera is a set of highly sensitive instruments that are perfectly suited for such a task. There is a dust analyzer capable of determining the chemical composition of particles a few microns in size. There is a magnetometer capable of detecting the faintest fluctuations in the magnetic field. There is even a special LiDAR that can detect clouds of particles invisible to a normal camera. Officially, all these instruments are intended for studying the asteroid, but it's as if they were specifically designed to take a swab from the trail of 3I Atlas. The Hera mission is officially intended for studying asteroids, but its true unspoken goal may be completely different. It may be humanity's first reconnaissance mission to an object we suspect of being artificial in origin. In this light, the secret UN committee and its protocols on concealment take on new colors. They are hiding information not only to prevent panic. They are hiding it to calmly, without unnecessary attention, prepare and execute this mission. Imagine what would happen if they announced it openly. We are sending a probe to investigate a possible alien ship. It would cause a geopolitical storm. Every country would demand access to the data. A race to build their own probes would begin. Instead of a coordinated scientific investigation, we would have chaos. But this way, under the plausible pretext of studying asteroids, they gain complete freedom of action. They are using an already existing, approved, and funded mission for their secret purposes. It's a brilliant, cynical, and extremely effective strategy. They are not building a new instrument. They are retasking one that already exists. And we, the independent researchers, must now closely watch every step of this mission, every technical malfunction, every delay in data publication. Because it is in these anomalies that the real results will be hidden. Mid-2027 is a date we must circle in red on our calendars. It will be the next moment of truth. But there is another window, a closer and more unpredictable one. It is connected not with our actions, but with the actions of 3I Atlas itself. It is now moving towards the Kuiper Belt. This is a giant ring of icy bodies orbiting beyond Neptune. It's the building debris left over from the formation of the solar system, an ideal source of water, carbon, and other volatile compounds. If the hypothesis that the object went there to refuel and create new seeds is correct, then we should see traces of this activity. What kind? We don't know. Perhaps there will be strange, unexplained flares on trans-Neptunian objects that happen to be near 3I Atlas. Perhaps we will detect anomalous changes in their orbits, as if someone were engaged in space mining. Or perhaps we will see new, small fragments begin to break off from the main body of 3I Atlas, heading out on new trajectories. Observing this is extremely difficult. The objects in the Kuiper Belt are faint, distant, but we have an instrument capable of doing it. It's the Vera C. Rubin Observatory, which is about to come online. Its main task is the LSST, the Legacy Survey of Space and Time, a complete scan of the entire visible sky every few days. It will catalog billions of objects, tracking the slightest changes in their brightness and position. It is the perfect tool for finding traces of 3I Atlas's activity. And here, we again face the same problem. The data from the Vera C. Rubin Observatory will be public, but its volume will be measured in petabytes. To find the anomaly we need in this ocean of information will require highly complex algorithms driven by artificial intelligence. And who will write these algorithms? The official scientific institutions, the very same ones that have already demonstrated their willingness to hide inconvenient information. What if a special filter is built into their anomaly detection algorithms? A filter that will automatically flag all oddities related to 3I Atlas as artifacts or noise and exclude them from public reports? Once again, a perfect system for hiding in plain sight is being created. They will give us access to all the data, but they will not give us the tools for its correct interpretation. A new stage of the race begins, the race of algorithms. Independent researchers will have to create their own systems for analyzing LSST data to try to find what the system will try to hide. This is a confrontation not of telescopes, but of artificial intelligences, and its outcome will determine whether we learn in time when the next batch of seeds is ready for dispatch. 2 windows into the future, 2 moments of truth that await us. Hera's flyby through the tail of 3I Atlas in 2027, and the start of operations of the Vera C. Rubin Observatory in the coming years. Each of these events carries both immense potential for revealing the truth and an immense risk of its even deeper concealment. The countdown has already begun, and we must be ready. We must watch. We must ask questions. And most importantly, we must not trust simple answers. Because in this story, the simple answers have always turned out to be the most sophisticated lies. In the grand drama of information where on one side there is a faceless, omnipotent system, and on the other, an incomprehensible cosmic intelligence, it is easy to forget the third force, the smallest, most fragile, but perhaps the most important one, the human being. Not humanity as an abstraction, but specific people. The very seekers who piece together the mosaic of truth in the silence of their offices and observatories. We spoke of the oracle Stefan Burns, of the graduate student nicknamed Salinity Seeker, of the anonymous analyst who noticed the changes in the UN protocols. Until now, they have been more like functions for us, sources of unexpected evidence. But now, when the stakes are so high and the future so uncertain, we must for a time shift our focus from the global to the personal. We must understand who these people are, what drives them, and what they have to face in their fight against the Goliath of institutional lies, because their stories are not just private biographies. They are a narrative of the price of knowledge in a world that prefers to live in ignorance. Let's return to Stefan Burns, the hermit from the Scottish Highlands. After he anonymously published his data on the spectrum of 3I Atlas b, he did not rest on his laurels. He continued his work. He understood that his single observation, no matter how anomalous, could easily be dismissed as an error. Confirmations were needed, and he decided to create a decentralized network to search for similar anomalies. He wrote open-source software that allowed other amateur astronomers with spectrographs to automatically analyze their data for the presence of that same signature, the combination of rare earth metals and circular polarization. He created an encrypted server where anyone could anonymously upload their findings. In essence, he was building an alternative, civilian, global fireball observatory, not under the control of any government. His initiative, named Project Cassandra, after the Trojan prophetess whose predictions no one believed, began to slowly but surely gain popularity in niche circles. Dozens of enthusiasts from around the world joined the search. They rechecked old archives. They monitored current meteor showers. They were the eyes and ears of humanity that the system was trying to shut. But their work did not go unnoticed. Soon after Cassandra began to yield its first results, a few more questionable but intriguing traces in archival data, pressure began to be applied to Stephen Burns. At first it was subtle, almost invisible things. His paper, submitted to a scientific journal, was rejected with the reasoning of insufficient statistical significance, although it was much higher than that of many published works. His request for an equipment upgrade, which he submitted to a German science foundation, was denied without explanation. Then, stranger things began to happen. At his remote home, there were interruptions in internet and electricity that the utility companies could not explain. One night, his observatory security system recorded an unidentified drone hovering over the dome. And then came the direct threats. He started receiving anonymous messages to his encrypted email. They contained no direct threats to his life. They were more sophisticated. The messages contained details of his personal life that only someone conducting constant surveillance could know. Hints about his health, about the well-being of his distant relatives. The text was cold, impersonal, as if written not by a human, but by an algorithm. The meaning was simple. We know who you are. We know what you are doing. Stop. This is a classic strategy of intelligence agencies. Not to create a martyr, but to quietly and methodically break a person psychologically, to make them doubt, fear, feel isolated. Burns was a strong man, but even he began to feel the icy breath of the system. He found himself a David who had not just thrown a stone at Goliath, but had discovered that Goliath was not one giant, but an entire army of invisible snipers aiming at everything he held dear. His story is not just the story of a scientist. It is the story of a dissident in a new information age, where dissent is punished not with prison, but with digital ostracism and psychological terror. But he did not give up. He only tightened his security measures, moved his servers to jurisdictions beyond the control of Western intelligence agencies, and continued his work, understanding that he was now fighting not only for the truth about space, but for his own right to seek it. Or take the story of Salinity Seeker, the young graduate student from Bremen who first pointed out the problem with upwelling. His real name is Thomas Weber. Unlike Burns, he was part of the academic system. He was writing his dissertation, dreaming of a scientific career. His post on the forum was simply an act of scientific curiosity. He wasn't thinking about any conspiracies. He just noticed a discrepancy in the data and wanted to discuss it with his colleagues. But the consequences of this act were catastrophic for him. A few weeks after his post, his academic supervisor, a respected professor, suddenly summoned him to his office. The conversation was short and harsh. The professor said that his unfounded speculations on online forums were casting a shadow on the reputation of the entire institute, that he had received a call from a representative of the National Science Foundation, who had transparently hinted that if the institute's staff continued to spread pseudo-scientific theories, future grant applications might face difficulties. The professor gave Thomas an ultimatum. Either he publicly retracted his words and deleted his posts, or he would be expelled, and his scientific career would be over before it had begun. Thomas was crushed. He had encountered the faceless but pervasive mechanism of academic censorship. There were no men in black here. There were polite officials, concerned professors, and frightened administrators. The system was protecting itself, using its own rules and levers. It wasn't silencing him. It was creating conditions in which speaking the truth became career suicide. Thomas Weber, unlike Burns, broke. He deleted his posts, published an apology on the forum where he wrote that his initial analysis was flawed, and fell silent. He saved his career, but he lost something more. His story is a story of how the scientific consensus, which should be a tool for seeking truth, turns into a tool for suppressing anomalies. It shows that modern science, despite all its declarations of openness, remains a deeply hierarchical and funding-dependent structure. And this dependency is its main vulnerability, which the system masterfully exploits. These two stories of Stefan and Thomas show two different faces of pressure: direct, intelligence style, and indirect, institutional. But they both illustrate the same principle. The system does not fight the information itself. It fights its carriers. It tries to isolate them, discredit them, intimidate them. It turns the search for truth from an intellectual adventure into a dangerous struggle for survival. And in this struggle, the seekers have only one weapon that the system cannot control. It is their decentralized, anonymous network. Project Cassandra, online forums, encrypted chats. All this becomes the modern equivalent of an underground press. It is a space where knowledge can spread, bypassing official channels. And that is precisely why the system fears these communities so much, because it can break one person, but it cannot break an idea that has taken hold of thousands. The human factor is both the greatest weakness and the greatest strength in this confrontation. And as long as there is at least one Stefan Burns willing to go to the end, and as long as there is at least one Thomas Weber who may have fallen silent but has not forgotten, the hunt for the truth will continue. In any complex investigation, there is a moment when the circle closes, when the last piece of evidence found suddenly illuminates the very first event with a new, sinister light. We began our journey with Event Trickster, the gigantic glowing patch in the Indian Ocean. We took it for an anomaly, a mystery to be solved. We traced its roots to the interstellar visitor 3I Atlas. We uncovered the mechanisms of its concealment by the system. We realized its possible technological and philosophical meaning. We thought we understood its nature. But what if we, like the system, were wrong about the most important thing? What if everything we learned was just the top layer, a smokescreen created not to hide the truth, but to distract us from it? Now, armed with all the accumulated knowledge, we must return to the beginning. We must look again at that very same satellite image of the Milky Sea. But this time, not through the eyes of oceanographers or even conspiracy theorists, but through the eyes of signal specialists. And only now do we begin to understand. What we considered an event was, in fact, a message. Let's once again recall the key feature of the Milky Sea that set it apart from any natural phenomenon: its absolute uniformity. We noted that the brightness of the glow over the entire area of 100,000 square kilometers was practically identical. It was like a color fill in a graphics editor. But the NOAA 20 satellite is not just a camera. Its VIRS radiometer measures the brightness of each pixel with the highest precision. When independent analysts from the Project Cassandra community gained access to the raw, unprocessed data from this instrument and conducted a detailed analysis, they discovered something that had escaped the initial glance. The glow was not perfectly uniform. It contained microscopic, barely perceptible variations in brightness. They were so faint that they were on the verge of statistical noise. Any official analysis would have written them off as instrument error. But these variations were not random. They formed a complex, non-periodic, but strictly regular pattern. It was like the watermarks on a banknote, visible only from a certain angle. This was not noise. It was a signal embedded within a signal. One of the project participants, a former cryptographer from the National Security Agency, suggested that we were dealing with a form of steganography, the art of covertly transmitting information by embedding it in another, unsuspecting container. In this case, the container was the Milky Sea itself, and the hidden message was this complex pattern of brightness variations. Using highly complex algorithms, the same ones used to extract weak signals from cosmic noise, they began their work. For weeks, their computers sifted through terabytes of data, trying to isolate this pattern and convert it into binary code. And when they finally succeeded, they obtained a giant file consisting of ones and zeros, a meaningless, at first glance, stream of bits. But even in this stream, they noticed traces of a complex mathematical structure. This was not a random set. It was an encrypted and most likely highly compressed archive. Decrypting it without a key was impossible. They had hit a dead end. It seemed the truth was in their hands, but it was locked in an unbreakable digital safe. But the key had to be somewhere. And then the cryptographer remembered the second anomaly recorded by Stefan Burns, the circular polarization of the light from the burning fireball. We had assumed it was a trace of some protective fields operation. But what if it had another function? The polarization of light is an ideal way to transmit information. By changing the direction of polarization, for example from right circular to left circular, one can encode the very same ones and zeros. Burns, fortunately, had recorded not only the final spectrum but also the raw data of how the polarization changed during those 47 seconds of observation. It was a very short, noisy signal. But when they applied the same cleaning algorithms to it, they obtained a small, only a few kilobytes, but perfectly clean fragment of binary code. They tried to use it as a key to decrypt the large file extracted from the ocean's glow. And the safe opened. What they saw changed everything. It was not an encyclopedia of the galaxy or a peaceful greeting. It was a technical report, a log file, a highly detailed description of the state of the Earth's biosphere and technosphere, made from the perspective of an external observer. There were maps of global ocean currents with centimeter-level accuracy. There was a complete chemical analysis of the atmosphere, including concentrations of rare gases and anthropogenic pollutants. There was a map of the global internet infrastructure, including all submarine cables and satellite constellations. There were even diagrams of the operation of our global navigation systems, GPS, GLONASS, Galileo, and, most frighteningly, there was a block of data titled Vulnerability Analysis of Key Technogenic Nodes. Priority high. This block contained a detailed analysis of our dependence on electronics, on time synchronization via GPS, on global data transmission networks. The report concluded with a short, cold summary. System unstable. Highly susceptible to cascading failure upon targeted impact to vulnerable nodes. Transition to Phase 2 recommended. This final, shocking revelation ties all the threads together and calls into question the very nature of our reality. The glow in the ocean was neither a natural phenomenon nor a signal addressed to us. It was a report sent back to the Masters. The seed probe, having settled in the ocean, didn't just activate. It conducted a full, deep scan of the planet. It probed all our technogenic and natural systems. And then, using the ocean itself as a giant transmitting antenna, it sent the results of this scan home. It was for the transmission of this giant volume of data that they needed such a huge area and such a powerful energy source. And the storm they created was needed not only so that no one could take samples. It created a perfect, clean channel for transmitting the signal through the ionosphere, minimizing atmospheric interference. And the decryption key, transmitted through the polarization of the fireball's light, was sent in advance, like a prefix, like a data packet header. Everything was a single, perfectly planned operation for the collection and transmission of intelligence information. The system, in the form of NASA and other agencies, apparently also managed to decrypt this message. And now their panicked concealment takes on a completely different, much darker meaning. They are hiding the truth not because they fear public panic. They are hiding it because they know we are defenseless. They know that they know all our weak spots. They know that Phase 2 is not a question of if, but a question of when. And all they can do is buy time and desperately prepare for a strike that could come at any moment and from any direction. We thought we were witnessing first contact, but in fact, we were witnessing the final stage of preparation for war. And we didn't even know it had already been declared. There is knowledge that does not enlighten, but incinerates. Knowledge that, instead of broadening horizons, brings the sky crashing down on you. It doesn't provide answers, but takes away all questions except one, the most important and most terrifying. What now? The decryption of the message hidden in the glow of the Milky Sea was precisely such a moment. It was not an epiphany. It was a verdict. Everything that came before, all our searches, hypotheses, our struggle with the system, all of it suddenly seemed like a naive child's game. We thought we were hunters of truth, heroes of the information resistance, but it turned out we were just accidental witnesses who overheard the executioners discussing the details of the upcoming execution. We gained access to forbidden knowledge, but this knowledge did not give us power. It paralyzed us. We now possess what can be called tragic knowledge, a clear and painful awareness of an inevitable catastrophe that no one else sees. The emotional climax of our investigation is not a moment of triumph, but a moment of profound isolation. Imagine the feeling of those few people from Project Cassandra who first saw the decrypted text. They sit in front of their monitors, in the silence of their rooms, scattered across the globe, but united by the same cold horror. Outside, life goes on as usual. Cars drive down the streets, people hurry about their business, laugh in cafes, argue about politics. The world continues to live in blissful ignorance, revolving in its familiar orbits. But these few, can no longer be part of this world. They have fallen out of it. They look at their loved ones, at their friends, and see not people, but defenseless children playing on the edge of a cliff. And they cannot warn them. Because if they go out into the square and shout, "We've decrypted a signal from the ocean. They know all our vulnerabilities and are preparing for Phase 2. What will happen? They will be called madmen. They will be laughed at. They will be accused of creating the greatest hoax in history. The system, of course, will deny everything, providing dozens of experts who will prove that their decryption is just the result of incorrect statistical processing of noise. They will find themselves completely isolated, and their warning will drown in an ocean of informational skepticism. This burden of knowledge is not only in the knowledge itself, but in the impossibility of sharing it. It creates an invisible wall between the knowing and the rest of humanity. You walk down the street and everything seems fragile, unreal, doomed. This civilization with all its achievements looks like a house of cards about to be blown down by an icy cosmic wind. And you carry this weight within you, alone. You become the keeper of a truth that no one wants, and a prophet of a catastrophe that no one will believe. This is not heroism. It is a curse. The system, in the form of the secret UN committee, also bears this burden. But they have chosen a different path. They have chosen the path of silent, desperate preparation. They are most likely in a panic, trying to strengthen the very vulnerable nodes that were indicated in the report. They are investing billions in cybersecurity, in protecting satellite constellations, in creating autonomous navigation systems independent of GPS. But all of this is just an attempt to patch holes in a sinking ship. They know that an adversary capable of such advanced technology will always be several steps ahead. They are playing chess with a grandmaster who sees the whole board, while they see only a few squares. Their silence is not so much a conspiracy as an admission of their own powerlessness. And we, the seekers, and they, the keepers of the system, have found ourselves in the same boat. We have become enemies who know the same terrible secret but react to it differently. We believe that humanity has the right to know, even if that truth is destructive. They believe that humanity must be protected from this truth, like a child from scary bedtime stories. Who is right? Perhaps no one. Perhaps any choice in this situation leads to disaster. Revealing the truth will cause chaos and anarchy, which will make us even more vulnerable. Keeping the secret leaves billions of people in ignorance, dooming them to die without any chance of salvation. This is a classic tragic dilemma with no good solution. We are all caught in a trap, not of our own making. And we are simply forced to play the roles that history has imposed on us. That is why we continue to speak. We continue to publish our investigations, like this one. We don't expect the majority to believe us. We are not calling for a revolution. We are doing this for the few who are able to hear. For those who feel that something is wrong with the world. For those who see the cracks in the facade of official reality. We are creating a community of the knowing, not to fight, but to watch. And perhaps, when Phase 2 arrives, it will be this community that can preserve and pass on the true knowledge of what really happened. We are not becoming warriors. We are becoming the chroniclers of the coming apocalypse. Our knowledge is not a weapon. It is a memory. We see the strings. We see the choreography. But the puppet master remains in the shadows. And the most terrifying question is not, what happens next? But are we next on its stage? And we have no answer to that question. We only have knowledge. Heavy, cold, tragic knowledge. And the responsibility it places on us. The responsibility to bear witness. Until the very end. We have come a long way. From the phosphorescent waves of the Indian Ocean to the icy edges of the solar system. From a simple sailor's legend to a complex, multi-layered picture of a quiet, almost invisible invasion. We have connected the dots scattered across time and space, the anomalous Milky Sea, the mysterious interstellar object 3I Atlas, the Error 404 in the planet's most secure archive, the secret protocols of a UN committee, and finally, the decrypted message that turned a scientific mystery into a direct and imminent threat. We have peeled back the layers of lies with which the system tried to shroud the truth and peered into the abyss that opened up behind them. We have realized the burden of tragic knowledge. And now, at the finale of our investigation, we are left not with answers, but with questions. But these are different questions. Not what happened, but what happens now. Not who are they, but what are they waiting for? The end of this story brings no relief. It opens a new chapter. A chapter in which we are all unwitting participants. Let's once more, in light of all we know, summarize. The picture that emerges is as follows. A certain ancient civilization, technologically immeasurably superior to us, is conducting a methodical program of expansion or exploration of the galaxy using autonomous, self-replicating probes. One such probe, 3I Atlas, has arrived in our solar system. It did not make direct contact, but used a seeding strategy. It detached a small seed fragment from itself, which delivered a payload into Earth's atmosphere. Trillions of nanotechnological mechanisms. These mechanisms, using seawater as a source of power and raw materials, self-organized into a giant distributed network. This network conducted a full vulnerability analysis of our planet, both natural and technogenic, after which, using the ocean itself as a transmitting antenna, it sent the collected report to its creators. This report contains a recommendation to proceed to Phase 2. We do not know what this phase is, but it is unlikely to involve an exchange of cultural achievements. Meanwhile, the probe 3I Atlas itself has not left our system but has traveled to the Kuiper Belt, possibly to replenish resources and create new seeds. The world's governments, in the form of a secret supranational structure, are aware of this. They too have intercepted and decrypted the report, and all their activity is now aimed at concealing this truth from the population and at a desperate, most likely doomed, attempt to prepare for the unknown. This is our reality, the reality in which we are living right now. The world has not changed, but our understanding of it has changed forever. We can no longer look at news about the launch of new satellites, the construction of submarine cables, or even anomalous weather events in the same way as before. Behind every such event, we now see the possible moves in this global, invisible war. We are living in a state of permanent anticipation. The anticipation of Phase 2. What could it be? A direct military invasion is unlikely. It is too crude and energy intensive. The report pointed to our technogenic vulnerabilities. Perhaps Phase 2 is a global, synchronized collapse of our entire infrastructure. Imagine a day when all GPS satellites are simultaneously disabled, all global financial networks crash, power plants go dark, the internet stops. Civilization as we know it will cease to exist within hours, plunging into a chaos from which it will never recover. And all this, without a single shot being fired, simply by a targeted impact on the very nodes that were listed in the report. Or perhaps Phase 2 is something more subtle, a biological impact, a new seeding, but this time not in the ocean, but in the atmosphere. Nanites programmed not for information gathering, but for modifying Earth's biota, for changing the climate, for eliminating species that interfere with, what? Terraforming? Preparing the planet for new masters? We can only guess, and this uncertainty is the most agonizing part of our burden. But it is also the strongest stimulus. We cannot stop. We cannot say, the investigation is over, because it has only just begun. We have uncovered the conspiracy of the past. Now we must learn to read the signs of the future. Our task is changing. From detectives we are turning into watchmen. We must continue to observe the Hera mission as it flies towards its secret goal, to observe the data streams from the Vera C. Rubin Observatory, searching for traces of activity in the Kuiper Belt, to observe the actions of the system, trying to guess from its steps what exactly it knows and fears, and to observe the planet itself, looking for new anomalies that might be harbingers of a new seeding. This is our watch, and we call on you to join it. Do not trust simple answers. Ask questions. Learn to analyze data. Support independent scientific projects. Follow our future investigations. In this world where information has become a weapon and silence a strategy, the only thing we have is our collective curiosity, our ability to doubt and to seek. We do not know how this story will end. Perhaps we are on the threshold of the darkest chapter in human history, or perhaps the realization of this threat is exactly the push we need to finally mature as a species. But one thing we know for sure, the hunt for the truth continues, and as long as we are searching, as long as we are asking questions, we have not lost. The watch continues.